Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the absolute biggest, most timeless mysteries of human existence. Seriously, think about it. Are our lives completely controlled by some pre-written, inescapable fate, or do we actually hold the steering wheel with our own free will? Well, today we are breaking down a fascinating source document that totally strips away all the murky mystique of esoteric philosophy. Instead, it explains the actual mechanics of destiny in a way that is just incredibly logical and, honestly, deeply practical.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever found yourself in a really tight spot? Maybe you're facing a crisis and suddenly, boom, you become highly religious. You start bargaining with the universe, right? If I just get out of this, I swear I'll donate to charity, or I'll never do that bad habit again. Well, the source material directly challenges this transactional approach to prayer. It asks a pretty blunt question. Does the divine really operate like a corrupt politician? Are divine favors simply handed out to whoever offers the highest praise or the biggest donation? To highlight just how absurd this transactional mindset really is, the author shares this hilarious anecdote. So, there's a wealthy merchant caught in a terrifying ocean storm. He is absolutely terrified of drowning, so he prays. He promises God that if he just survives this, he will sell his massive, super expensive house and donate every single penny of the proceeds to the temple. Well, the storm magically stops, but as soon as he is safely back on land, you guessed it, the merchant's greed kicks right back in. He finds a very sneaky loophole. He puts his house up for sale for a mere 1,000 rupees. But he ties the sale of the house to his puppy, pricing the puppy at a whopping 3 crore rupees. We're talking tens of millions. The buyer has to buy the whole shebang, so the merchant donates the 1,000 rupees to God, keeping his promise on a technicality, and pockets an absolute fortune for himself. As funny as that story is, it actually points out a pretty dark flaw in how we tend to view destiny. We so often treat rituals and prayers like cheat codes to just bypass the consequences of our own actions. But really think about it. If God arbitrarily hands one person an easy, comfortable life and throws another person into absolute suffering simply based on who sings the best hymns or drops the most cash in the donation box, well, God wouldn't be just at all, right? He'd be wildly, unfairly partial. So, logically, there has to be a much more structured system at play here, a system where true justice actually prevails. And that brings us to this brilliant story about Lord Yama, the divine god of judgment. A man dies and is brought right before Yama. Chitragupta, who is basically the divine accountant, checks the man's ledger and finds a lifetime filled with terrible, incredibly selfish choices. However, there is one single tiny entry, a donation of 5 paise to a blind beggar. Hearing this, the man gets super excited. He thinks this one tiny ritual is going to save him, but Yama just looks at him and orders, give him his 5 paise back and send him to hell. It powerfully, unequivocally proves that tiny token rituals absolutely cannot just magically erase a lifetime of bad choices. So, if we can't just bribe our way out of our destiny, how does this system actually work? Well, this source document gives us a totally brilliant, logical framework. It says that to truly understand these esoteric spiritual concepts, we need to look at karma exactly like a standard financial banking system. Let's break down these complex Sanskrit terms into 3 super easy, digestible banking concepts. First up, we have Sanchita Karma. This is your total savings account, literally the sum of everything you have ever done in past lives. Next is Prarabdha Karma, which is your current withdrawal. And finally, we have Aganya Karma, which represents your new investments. So the crucial point is really understanding Prarabdha. When you have money sitting in a bank, you don't just withdraw your entire life savings all at once just to go buy some groceries, do you? No, you draw out just a little bit for your current needs. According to the text, Prarabdha is exactly that. It's simply that small portion of your total karma savings that you are destined to withdraw, experience, and spend in this current lifetime. It's actually what astrologers are trying to read. It dictates your starting environment, the family you're born into, and the initial challenges you're going to face. But wait, this naturally transitions us into a huge mystery regarding divine intervention. Because if our current fate, our Prarabdha, is already totally locked in as a withdrawal that we absolutely have to spend, then what is the point of praying? I mean, how can miracles even happen if the rules of the universe demand that we experience the exact fate we brought with us? Can God actually step in and change your fate? To answer this, the text illustrates the actual limitations of the divine using 2 really incredible parables. In the first one, God appears to a sage. The sage asks for a really simple boon. Hey, just move this old scar on my left ankle over to my right ankle.
God looks completely embarrassed and replies, "Look, these things are prarabdha karma. I cannot change them." In another story, a sage asks God to bless him so that whenever he stitches his torn clothes, the thread will always follow the needle. God kind of laughs and points out that this is already the natural law. It literally happens on its own. These stories beautifully show that even God himself respects the universal laws of karma. He doesn't just arbitrarily break the rules. Okay, so if God isn't out there breaking the rules, how does a miracle actually happen when we pray during a crisis? Well, the source explains the true mechanic of a miracle perfectly. God essentially acts as a divine bank teller. When you pray sincerely, God doesn't just conjure magic out of thin air. Instead, he looks directly into your Sanchita account, your past total savings. If you have good deeds saved up in there, God transfers those past good deeds into your current life to save you from your present crisis. But, and this is a big but, if your savings account is completely empty, even God cannot help you. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it introduces the most empowering part of this entire framework, the third column from our banking table, Agamiya Karma. While your past is locked away in savings and your present is a locked withdrawal, Agamiya represents your new investments. The text defines Agamiya Karma as the newly generated karma that you are creating right here, right now, entirely through your own free volition and conscious decisions. The author really emphasizes this pivotal concept. Neither your past fate nor God can control this variable. Agamiya is a completely blank test paper. Think of it like a test with an out-of-syllabus question. If you just don't attempt it, you get 0 marks. Karma only registers when you make a conscious choice to act. Your Agamiya is entirely 100% up to you. Now, we as humans constantly try to dodge responsibility for this. The source narrates this wild story of a scholar who brutally beats a cow to death. When he's confronted about it, he actually claims his hands belonged to Lord Indra, the king of the gods, so the sin is Indra's fault, not his. Well, later on, Indra disguises himself and visits the scholar's beautiful garden, praising it endlessly. The proud scholar immediately puffs up and takes all the credit, saying he built it with his own 2 hands. Indra instantly chalks the disguise and calls out the blatant hypocrisy. He says, while creating the garden, your hands were your own, but while killing the cow, they belonged to me? We simply cannot blame destiny or the divine for the Agamiya karma we freely choose to create. And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact of our choices, especially in the famous banquet parable. God invites both the asuras, the demons, and the devas, the angels, to a massive feast. But he throws a curveball. He ties wooden planks to all of their arms so none of them can bend their elbows. The asuras, acting entirely out of their own toxic selfishness, try desperately to throw the food up in the air and catch it in their mouths. They just spill everything and end up starving. The devas, on the other hand, sit down across from each other. They use their straight arms to feed the person sitting across from them. Everyone gets to feast. It so perfectly contrasts the devastating, isolating effects of selfishness against the absolute prosperity of virtuous, cooperative choices. But what happens when we use our free will, specifically just to hurt others? The text shares this dark comedy about 2 friends who do intense penance and receive boons from God. But there is a catch. Whatever they ask for, their neighbor gets double. So the first friend asks for a nice bungalow, but he gets insanely jealous when he sees his neighbor got a mansion twice the size. Next, he asks for a car, and boom, the neighbor gets 2. Consumed by this incredibly toxic envy, he uses his final Agamiya choice, his last boon, to say, "Make me blind in one eye." He literally foolishly sacrifices his own eye just to ensure his neighbor goes completely blind. That is the ultimate tragic price of a selfish choice. This is exactly why the author stresses an ancient proverb: don't look into any time or auspicious period to perform a good deed. You know, people often wait around for the perfect astrological alignment or the right time of year to be generous or kind. But the text explains that because our newly generated Agamiya immediately joins our current prarabdha fate, choosing virtue right now is the ultimate instant antidote to any bad fate. You absolutely do not need to wait for the stars to align to simply be a good person today. Let's move to and see how this builds to a final, truly defining confrontation. There was a young, incredibly arrogant boy who wanted to trick a wise, all-knowing sage. The boy catches a butterfly and hides it behind his back in his closed fist. He walks right up to the sage and asks, "What do I have in my hand?" The sage just smiles and says, "A butterfly."
So the boy then springs his trap. He looks at the sage and asks, is the butterfly alive or is it dead? The boy's plan is pretty sinister here. If the sage says alive, the boy is going to crush it to prove him wrong. If the sage says dead, the boy will just open his hand and let it fly away. He thinks he's completely outsmarted the universe. But the sage simply looks deeply at the boy and delivers the ultimate truth. Whether it is alive or dead is in your hands only. This right here cements the ultimate revelation of the text. Despite all our past baggage, our ultimate destiny is forged entirely by our own hands.
So let's bring it all together. The past is your savings, your present circumstances are your withdrawals, but your actions today, those are your brand new investments. The architecture of your destiny isn't locked away up in the stars somewhere. It is quite literally sitting right in the palm of your hand right now, in the form of your own free will. So the ultimate question this source material leaves us with is this: what new karma will you choose to create with the butterfly in your hands today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly, highly encourage you to use your free will wisely out there.